Greetings, I'm Sophis. Today, I'm bringing you the end result of delving into theory crafting for the sake of a very resilient form unit. The part 2 to the topic I've started with Ashen Raiders. But don't worry if you haven't seen the first part. This will still make perfect sense. A strong combo to make your units very resilient is Tenacious, Virtuous Spirit, and Draconian Transformation. In effect, your form units don't lose effectiveness by losing models, and you get extra damage with them by fighting at lower health. When you add Painbound from the new Tome of Torment, you also get a positive status effect when you get attacked. As I mentioned in part 1, I had a build that did play with the concept before Tome of Torment was added. But the problem is, this new tome wouldn't fit in there without disrupting the build, its theme, and its affinities. So I figured I would start from scratch to make the combination work. I realized I would have to make use of a very niche society trait, Empire of the Cosmos. The reason being that there are many good enchantments and minor transformations spread across the affinities that once put together could make something greater. My original goal with it was to simply trigger the first two effects of Empire of the Cosmos. This would enable me to mix and match tier 3 and 4 tomes without worrying about requirements. Thankfully, the last iteration I went with triggers Empire of the Cosmos completely. As a final note before we get into the specifics of this, I apologize, but I've had to use console commands to experiment with this build, as I've been testing out some variations, and to save myself some time, I decided to use them. Rest assured, I've not used any to enhance combat effectiveness, just speed up research, leveling, and city development so I can play around with the faction. Now onto the build. What you've been watching so far is the battle performance, and hopefully you're impressed with the end result. One thing I realized while developing the build is that it wasn't just about making form units resilient. Picking the right unit to be the centerpiece was also important. Originally, I had set out to make bastions from Industrious Culture that centerpiece. They perform well in auto combat and are overall very hardy. But then it occurred to me that the Liege Guard from Feudal has an almost identical stat line and comes with the benefit of protecting your heroes. This means that even if you modify this build and make the ruler a dragon, giant, or eldritch sovereign, in a way they will benefit from the resilience of the form units by proxy through this protection. Under the hood of what you're seeing, there's a lot of bonuses at play. Let me break them down on screen. We have 8 transformations in total, the expected combination of Virtuous Spirit and Painbound. In this version, I've replaced Draconian Transformation for Gift of the Old Blood. You lose the Draconic Rage and Natural Regeneration, but get other benefits in place that work just as well, if not better, under the setup. My reasoning was that, as I am focusing on resilience and on giving them a means of self-healing, Gift of the Old Blood had more to offer in that regard, compared to Draconian Transformation, which mostly benefits you at lower health and has a more passive way of self-healing. The other transformations benefit defense or punishing the enemy one way or another. The automatic debuff clearing in Pure Soul is very useful. Earthkin neutralizes the flaw form trait this race has, and Supergrowth gives them extra retaliation. Flesh-carved runes will synergize with the bleeding and blood parasite strategy, and Living Shadows adds a debuff to enemies attacking our units as well as raising their evasion. Enchantments-wise, there's a two-way split. First is the Liege Guard as our core unit, as well as any other melee like the blood maggots that get spawned on the battlefield. The other half is our backline, which should be made of battle mages or support, as not all the enchantments apply to ranged units. For our melee, blood-drinking blades and obsidian weapons are a self-sustaining combination. The latter enables the former to trigger reliably, giving a means of healing to them. Prescient Circlets, Mirror Veil, Holy Aura, and Mantle of the Blood Noble are all defense-oriented. Precognition is a very effective defensive ability for a unit that for the most part we want as a line holder. Just go into defense mode and avoid 1 damage instance in most cases. Mirror Veil punishes enemies for dealing non-physical damage, which compensates a bit for the lower resistance of the Liege Guard. Holy Aura improves the defense that Liege Guard can grant to adjacent units, but the biggest benefit is the spirit damage dealt passively to adjacent enemies at the end of your turn. Lastly, Mantle of the Blood Noble's biggest benefit is triggering bolstered defense and bolstered resistance once a turn when hit, thanks to Coagulate. Then there's Shadow Blades, which help our retaliation attacks on occasion. If melee attackers trigger the blind debuff from Living Shadows, the Liege Guard gets to bypass half of their defense and resistance when attacking. The backline gets Sanguine Focus, Fated Projectiles, and Tormenting Projectiles. It isn't a lot of bonuses, but it's good enough to make Blood Cultists and the Oracle a pretty good backline to support your ruler and heroes while the melee holds back any attackers. So let's go over form and society traits now. Feudal Aristocrats, as we are focusing on Liege Guard. Then Empire of the Cosmos to enable the very mixed combination of tomes, letting us bypass the usual restrictions. And Prolific Swarmers, as our army will mostly be cultural form units, so the discount to their upkeep is good. If you don't want Prolific Swarmers, pick any other Chaos trait, as that affinity point is required. Form trait-wise, Tenacious to combine with Virtuous Spirit, Ferocious to power up retaliation attacks, and Bulwark to further increase defenses. You can swap out Bulwark for Strong if you feel the faction is defensive enough as it is, but I am attempting to make a very resilient Liege Guard first and foremost. It may sound counterproductive to pick Vulnerable to Physical as a flaw, but consider that the Liege Guard has plenty of defense, and that we have Earthkin to nullify that -1 defense. Now let me make a quick aside to mention the ruler for this faction, now that I've explained the key strategy and benefits the cultural units get. At the same time I was looking into how to make resilient form units, I was discussing with one of you about rulers, ascension traits, and attempting to get a lot of power to your ruler's attack. While the discussion started with Eldritch Sovereigns, we ended up talking about Elder Vampires. With that in mind, I refined the first Elementalist Elder Vampire that I have showcased in my first Vampire faction video. I've swapped out from a Disciple of Frost for a Disciple of Earth, as they get 2 evocations that have the same base damage, but one is single target whilst the other is a 1 hex area, making for versatile damage. Also, Elder Vampires can actually double tap on the power of blood buffs, as one of the Ascension traits you can pick from Bloodright stacks with Hemomancer's buffs, and unlike Hemomancer's, it lasts for a turn instead of just for a single attack. As both are free actions, you can still trigger both on the same turn you use a full action evocation. Not to mention you can triple dip on buffs by using Drain Familiar. All in all, it's a small adjustment, but it seems to make the mage playstyle more powerful. Now let's get back to the rest of the build and the tomes. I've already explained and broken down what enchantments and transformations the faction gets, so this time I'll go quickly through them. You'll want Tome of the Bloodright and Tome of Rock at tier 1. Tome of Virtue and Tome of Shades at tier 2, Tome of Torment, Tome of Vigor, and Tome of Prophecies at tier 3, Tome of the Archon, Tome of the Astral Mirror, and Tome of the Crimson Rain at tier 4. Then you have your pick of tier 5 tome, as Empire of the Cosmos lets you pick any you want. Eternal Lord might be the best one if you go with a Vampire Ruler. And that's the build I've figured out as far as making very resilient units go. It does mix a lot of tomes, and thematically it might feel as though it clashes a lot. But I've tried rationalizing it as a vampire mage that has taken blood and power from many sources and infused them into his minions, forging an army capable of enduring a lot of punishment. This is my second to last video for this year. I'll be taking a break for the holidays, but expect a final video or short to drop on the 21st before I do. With that said, that's all I have for you today. I hope you're having a good day, a good holiday season, and see you in the next one.